Okay, Councilmember Burks, you are live on YouTube.
Thanks very much, Jeff. And good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us tonight for our City Council Public Safety Subcommittee meeting. July 21st, it is 7 p.m. So I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Do I have a motion to adopt our agenda?
So I'll move that we adopt the agenda.
All right, I'll second that. Thank you very much, Councilmember Bliss. Before we go into public comments, I just wanted to, actually, let's do public comments first. Let's move to item number 3 on the agenda. And this is public comments. For anybody who is online or watching or who may be able to call in, if they're not able to be online, this is your opportunity to make any comments you'd like on a topic that is not associated with what we are going to discuss tonight. So anything outside of the realm of what is on the agenda tonight, and what is on the agenda tonight, and I'll just read the discussion item, is response to community emails and questions surrounding police policies and procedures. And this is sort of part 2 of a 2-part meeting. The last meeting we had was a town hall where the chief and city manager and Councilmember Bliss, my partner here on the subcommittee, discussed various suggestions and ideas and opinions that the public provided, and had a really great, robust conversation. Now, this meeting tonight is really to dive deeper into some of those issues and to offer some potential solutions, some ideas for change, and some ideas for augmentation around our police services. So if you have something or an issue, an item that does not involve that space, now is the time to raise your hand and let Mr. Heyman know that you'd like to make a comment. Jeff, do we have anybody for this round?
Well, thank you, Cam. I do want to say, if you are watching on YouTube and you want to call in, the number to call in is 1-669-900-9128. So again, area code 669-900-9128. And the webinar ID, get your pencils out, which you'll have to key in when prompted, is 826-3550-2949. Again, the webinar ID is 826-3550-2949. So if you are watching on YouTube, go ahead and use that to get in. And if you are on a phone, then you need to press *9 to use the raise your hand function. And if you're on Zoom, just hit the little button that says raise your hand. And with that said, there are no hands raised. We can give another minute if you'd like, or I'll just let you know if I see anything.
Let's wait about 15 seconds if that's okay, Jeff.
Yeah. Looks like everyone wants to talk about what's on the agenda.
Okay, good. All right, we'll get started here in a minute. I think we've got 26 participants, which is great. Thank you so much for everybody who's called in and are going through the motions with our Zoom meetings. And thank you to Jeff Heyman very much from our city staff, who's orchestrating tonight's Zoom webinar. I would like to just make a couple of announcements. One is I'm joined by Councilmember Stephen Bliss, as I mentioned, who is member of our subcommittee, our public safety subcommittee. So welcome, Councilmember Bliss. Good to see you. Also joined by, thank you, Stephen. Also joined by our city manager, Nirup Srivatsa. I would say to my left, but I think the squares show up differently on different screens. So Nirup is to my left tonight, and down below me here is our Chief of Police, Ben Aldrett, who's here tonight as well. I'd also like to welcome Jennifer Wakeman and Tracy Robinson from our administrative staff, 2 of our administrative leaders with our city staff. Thank you very much, Jennifer and Tracy, for being here. And Kathy Surges Moscato, who is also with the Lafayette Police Department. And Kathy needs no introduction. She's been with us for a long, long time, doing great, fantastic work, has also joined us tonight as well. So we'll go ahead and, just as a quick announcement, the purpose again for this evening is a follow on from our very first meeting that Councilmember Bliss and I called really in response to just a great sort of outpouring of public comment around ideas associated with police reform, and all in light of what's happening nationally and internationally. It's been several months now, but after a series of very, very unfortunate incidents that have taken place around the country, the most prominent being the death of George Floyd, the very tragic death of George Floyd by the police in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And we, Councilmember Lewis and I, thought that it was appropriate to call the subcommittee for these public town halls to discuss with the public how the public in Lafayette, any ideas or solutions or potential suggestions that they had as we move forward as a community. And also, since then, we've generated from the City Council a task force that we haven't quite named yet, because we're going to do that after our next town hall, after we listen to more feedback from folks. But in general, in the area of social justice, racial equity, racial equality, this is separate from that task force, but this will certainly feed into what we hope to accomplish with that task force, and making some hopefully fairly profound changes in our community for the better, and some changes that I feel are overdue in Lafayette, and hopefully that we can get to fairly quickly here. I was the one who did put the task force agenda idea on the agenda, and very grateful to Vice Mayor Candell for chairing that committee, and for Councilmember Geringer also for being on that committee. And I am the vice chair of that particular committee. But tonight we're going to talk about our police department and law enforcement in Lafayette. And if I could maybe turn it over to Councilmember Bliss, if you have any opening comments, and then we'll get right into it.
Yeah, just thank you, Councilmember Burks. I just wanted to first of all thank you for your leadership, both on this public safety subcommittee and our work in looking at police activity and police policy, law enforcement policy in Lafayette and in Contra Costa County more generally, and also as well for your calling for the broader task force to look at racial equity issues in Lafayette. As you mentioned, these are issues that are in some ways related, but I think it's valuable both to have this venue tonight to talk specifically about issues related to policing and public safety, and have a deep conversation on that, and then also to have, as you mentioned, the upcoming town hall that'll be a broader discussion around issues related to racial equity, diversity, inclusion, and what those mean for our community. I also want to say that we've received a lot of comments on issues related to public safety and policing via email over the last several weeks. And I don't want to speak for Cam, but I know, like me, he reads every one of those that we receive, and that input's been great. And really tonight then represents what I see as continued dialogue between the city and between our police department and the community. And for that, I want to thank not just the members of the public that wrote in or otherwise provided comment, but also I want to thank Police Chief Aldrich for being open to the dialogue, to already providing a lot of comment in writing to the community on these issues, and also to City Manager Srivatsa for all her work as well, and working with council and the police chief on advancing this dialogue. So tonight is by no means the end of the discussion, but I do think by virtue of it being this first town hall under the auspices of the subcommittee since the murder of George Floyd and related incidents nationwide, a very important dialogue. And so, as Cam mentioned, I'm grateful for the great turnout that we have tonight. More than 25 attendees online, handful other watching on YouTube as well. So very excited about this evening, both to continue the dialogue, perhaps generate some recommendations to City Council on these issues, but then looking forward to continuing this discussion in the months ahead as well. So thank you, Cam, for this, and also to the chief and to the city manager for being a part of this, and to all the staff that are attending this evening.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you very much. And yeah, one thing I'd like to mention before we get into the staff report is Councilmember Bliss is the chair of our legislation committee of our city council, and I'm fortunate enough to sit on that committee as well. And for those of you that haven't seen the YouTube recording, we did discuss and propose positions that the city council ultimately accepted, and the mayor sent letters forward on several items related to law enforcement reform that are statewide, that were sponsored by either assembly members or state senators. So I would urge you to take a look, if you have a chance, at that YouTube recording, as well as it does feed into the sort of the larger picture of some police reform and some really good legislation, I think, that has come forward that we had a chance to take a look at. So we're really paying very close attention to this space. So with that, why don't I go ahead and turn it over to our city manager, Nirup Srivatsa, and our chief of police, Ben Aldred, for our staff report, and then we'll go from there. And the idea tonight, again, is to make this as interactive as we can with as many folks as we have virtually, but certainly by no means is this going to be just a one-way dialogue. We want this to be very interactive. So over to you, Nirup, and to Ben.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Councilmember Burks and Councilmember Bliss, and welcome everybody. You have on the website the city's staff report that comes from the police chief and myself. In the staff report, we addressed many of the issues and questions that were raised at the last meeting. And I'm going to turn it over now to Chief Aldred to talk about to present the highlights of that report, and then I will focus on the 5 recommendations that we are making to the council subcommittee.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, city manager and council members. I do encourage everyone, if you have not yet, please review the staff report. Also, on the staff report, I give you a link for the community message that I put out back on June 18th. That is found. You can find that on lovelafayette.org underneath public safety. That message is there and available. The goal between the staff report and the community message was to address the bulk and hopefully all the questions we received regarding a variety of topics: use of force, training, de-escalation, crisis intervention, racial implicit bias training, and things along those lines. In the staff report, we did attempt to address questions that came up during the last public safety subcommittee. And there have been a lot of questions about call logs and tracking the race, gender, age, reason for the stop, things along those lines, data. And so in the staff report, I did want to address Assembly Bill 953, which is also known as RIPA, or the Racial and Identity Act of 2015. That was put in place in 2016. The governor directed for there to be a board convened and requiring law enforcement agencies in California to start tracking data regarding any police contact. It was trickled out based on the size of a police agency and based on the size of the Contra Costa Sheriff's Office. Our first report is due out in 2022. But in the staff report, I do give a link for RIPA, talk more at length about that. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. Also, just want to highlight both in the community message and in the staff report, I talk about the Sheriff's Office principal policing page, which talks a lot about our training, and had links for you to click on to look at the training curriculum, or we'll say curriculum for those courses. I was notified the links weren't working and it was corrected today. So if you've been looking at those training pages, that principal policing, and wanting to see what the curriculum is for those various trainings that we receive, those links should be working now. So just want to update everybody on that. Throughout the staff report, after answering questions or trying to address the suggestions that were made, we talk about budget, highlighting the 9 different funds that I, as your police chief, manage or oversee. Obviously, police services being the largest, and that's where I sort of took some time to talk about what that budget is and what we do with that budget. And as I've from day one, this is the people's money. This is community money. This is not my money. It's my job to manage those resources that are allocated to accomplish our mission. And so we definitely want to be transparent with that and be open to explaining what we spend the money on. In the last 2 years, there's been a heavy emphasis with wildfire preparedness and PSPS preparation, or public safety power shutoff preparation. And a lot of resources have gone out from the police services budget. We don't have a line item budget specifically for equipment in our Emergency Preparedness Commission budget, for example. And so when we look at purchasing equipment, wiring up intersections for power and purchasing generators to power 8 main intersections in town during a PSPS, those are things that do come out of police services. And again, I would encourage everyone to take a look at the staff report, and I go a little more in depth in that, but I don't want to take too much time tonight with that. And through this process, the city manager and I have developed 5 recommendations for our public safety subcommittee, and I would like to turn over to our city manager to discuss those.
Thank you, Chief Aldred. We heard from the community at the last meeting and through emails that we needed to have more, they needed to have more access to what the police department does and how it's managed. And so as the first 2 recommendations, we are proposing that to provide more access to information of the police department, that this public safety committee, which normally meets on an as-needed basis, would meet quarterly at noticed public meetings in which the public would be invited to attend. At those quarterly meetings, the police chief will provide statistics, crime statistics, person and property crime data, the number of citations that were issued over the last quarter, and the number of arrests made. And this would be a meeting where the public would have the ability to ask questions and engage in a discussion with the 2 council members who serve on that subcommittee. We also are increasing the frequency in which the police chief makes his reports to the full council. Traditionally, for many years, the police chief has presented a report, an annual report to the city council. Once again, this is going to be made into a quarterly report, and there will be more data and the availability again for the public to ask questions and for the council also to listen, to hear from the public. There was some discussion about the fact that we contract with the county sheriff for our police services, and the chief and I looked at our processes and procedures. I view our police department as ours. They wear our badges, they drive our cars, but we do contract with the police department. If there were a complaint made about a police officer today, that matter would go to the sheriff's department. There would be an internal affairs investigation, and the matter would be adjudicated by the sheriff's office. We're changing that in a way that I will become involved and notified when a complaint is filed, and I will also be made aware of the conclusions. And the council has had a long-standing policy of no tolerance for inappropriate behavior. And I will ensure that if the outcome of that, the investigation is one that the officer is not suitable for Lafayette, I will ask the police chief to replace that officer with somebody more in keeping with our own values. We also talked about training. As the chief has mentioned in his report, all the officers currently receive training in the area of crisis intervention, de-escalation, implicit bias, cultural and racial diversity. And their updates to these courses, we want to do more. We want to see if we can strengthen the training modules offered to our officers. So the police chief is going to be researching additional courses that we can send our officers to, and we'll return in 3 months to this subcommittee with a recommendation for additional training. And finally, there were many questions and concerns about mental health intervention and the request that those kinds of calls be handled by non-uniformed officers. This is a matter a concern that's been raised throughout the county. All city managers are hearing this loud and clear. And earlier this month, the Contra Costa Mayors Conference, at the meeting of the Contra Costa Mayors, the mayors directed the city managers to come up with a consolidated and regional approach to address mental health issues with non-law enforcement responses. So the city managers have formed a committee, and I serve on that committee. And we have met once, and what we're doing at the moment is looking at 6 case studies of successful programs throughout the country, including CAHOOTS, which is the Eugene, Oregon program, the CIT, or the Crisis Intervention Team from Memphis, Tennessee, and Eagle County, Colorado's co-responder program. We want to know how it works in other parts of the city, of the country, and whether we can model a program that would be best suited to the county. We're also meeting with the Contra Costa Health Services Director next week and the county administrator. And the goal is to update the Contra Costa mayors in September. They meet in early September. So we have a lot of work ahead of us. But since this is a regional effort and a countywide effort, there's a lot of momentum and interest in seeing this succeed. And those are the 5 recommendations that we're offering the Public Safety Subcommittee for its consideration this evening.
Thank you very much, City Manager Srivatsa. Before I bring it back and look to Councilmember Bliss, maybe to start off with questions or comments, and then of course we'll turn to the public very eagerly. On the recommendations, just as a matter of process, would those 5, if we were to take them hypothetically at face value right now, would they be matters that we could vote on and execute on tonight, or would we bring them back to the City Council for endorsement for a majority vote at the council level? Narup, do you know?
I would recommend that you take it to the full. I would recommend that you take it to the full council for.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. All right, Councilmember Bliss, do you want to start with any questions or comments for the chief or Narup?
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Burks, and thank you, the city manager and the chief for the great presentation and for kind of setting the stage for our discussion and also for the public comment. I had a couple of questions on, I think I'll just for now just focus on questions about the recommendations in particular. I think the staff report is great, and I think these recommendations generally make a lot of sense. I just had a couple just things I wanted to follow up on before we go to public comment. I think on item 2, or recommendation 2 about the transparency, which is the quarterly summary report idea, which we currently get an annual report, and this would be making it quarterly. And so I think that's a great idea. I find the annual reports to be really valuable. I remember well last year we got the in-person presentation from the chief before taking it to the city council. I thought that process was really valuable. And so I entirely support the recommendation. I think I don't know if we need to codify this, but the one thing I'd love to see us do is whatever we can do to make, to publicize. I know we do this with city council meetings as best we can. There's a lot of issues that are of interest to the public, of course, but I really think that those quarterly reports could be a great opportunity for the community to better understand how the police operate and to ask questions they might have just about what the data say. I found the report to be robust and really thought-provoking. And so when I talk about tonight as being like the next step in an ongoing dialogue, I kind of see those quarterly reports as being a key part of that dialogue moving forward. So I don't think this needs to be codified in the recommendation, but I just want to say for the record, I'd love for us to find a way to really kind of boost the visibility of those quarterly reports when they are made to council, so that the public can really be aware of them, get their questions answered, and we could be a little bit more intentionally publicly facing in some of those data sharing activities. So I just want to kind of flag that for now. But I entirely support the recommendation. On number 3, just a question on that. I'm very excited to hear that the Public Managers Association is looking at this. When we think about budgeting, I think the extent to which there might be ways of better investing in addressing public health issues, I think is kind of the premise for that undertaking right now. I know that things are just underway on the route, but if you could just say a little bit about kind of the general time frame for the work of that group under the Public Managers Association aegis, and just kind of a general sense of when you expect to have something kind of back for consideration, either at the county level or the city level, or whatever that might look like.
Certainly. Our goal is to come up with a draft paper for the Contra Costa Mayor's Conference in September. A letter was sent from the city of Walnut Creek to the Contra Costa Board of Supervisors, asking that they engage in discussions on a more robust mental health program in the county. The response we got from the Board of Supervisors was that they were willing to discuss it, but they wanted to engage in those more serious discussions in September. So I see the public managers work on the preliminary recommendations. We're on fact-finding mode right now. It's not only what other cities do, which is important, but how do they pay for it? And also to understand what the county offers today and what's their budget today. So we're doing a lot of research. The goal is to update the mayor's conference on September the 3rd, and then based on the feedback we received, started to develop objectives, outcomes, and a program, and work with the County Board of Supervisors on that program. I suspect at that point in time, the mayor's conference will ask a couple of mayors to be involved in those discussions rather than just the city managers themselves. So I'm hopeful that in the fall, we will have the beginnings of at least the program, but in order to truly implement it, we need to find sufficient budgets for it.
Okay, thank you. And so that's helpful. Thank you, Nirup. And just to kind of pick up on that, and maybe one thing that occurs when you mention that time frame. First of all, that's big thanks to the group. It's a big undertaking and on a really ambitious timeline. So I appreciate. It's clear that the group is approaching this with a great sense of urgency. So I really appreciate that. In terms of budgetary implications, obviously at the city level, we're in this period of great unknowns given the pandemic and the potential impact on public budgets at all levels, of course. I know that we in June, City Council enacted a budget, and then the plan, as I understand, is we'll kind of revisit the budget in December, see where we're at, make necessary adjustments. I know a big part of that is just to get a better sense of where the revenue picture is. But if we're going to be looking at the budget or revisiting it in December, it seems to me that if there's any budgetary opportunities or potential changes that grow out of this mental health discussion, it seems to me that phasing wise, that work that you're doing on the mental health front could potentially feed into those budget deliberations that the council will be having in December. Does that timing more or less line up, would you say?
Yes, Council Member Bliss, that would work. I know that Administrative Services Director Tracy Robinson plans to provide you actually with more frequent updates on the
Sure.
sales tax figures.
Right.
So as we go, we will learn more about how robust our revenues are. And in December, I think we'll be in a better position to know how much we can afford to invest in this program. Some of the prototypes, the models that we're looking at are funded through different ways. The Eagle County, Colorado's program, for example, is funded through the marijuana sales tax, and a large portion of the money comes from them. Others are funded through grants and through foundations. So we're going to be looking at all kinds of funding sources and matching that with the program that we will be developing.
Thank you. I think that's it for me for now in terms of questions. So thank you. Thanks again for the staff report and for addressing these initial questions. That's it in terms of questions right now. That's it. That's it for me.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Bliss. Just a few questions and comments from me. I'll start with a comment. Thank you very much to the city manager and to the chief for delivering the staff report. Thinking back and looking at my notes from our first meeting, these general areas do cover largely the themes that were discussed during our first meeting, specific to oversight. And we have two categories of oversight here. One at the more strategic level, associated with our subcommittee and Councilmember Bliss and I. And I think I'm very much in favor of meeting on a regular schedule to provide oversight, specific to oversight to our police department. And I think the community needs that from a transparency perspective, and from to provide the opportunity for the public to weigh in on issues that they are either in favor of or not in favor of. So certainly quarterly, even perhaps monthly, to start off with, and that's something we can perhaps discuss. Very, very, very positive on the mental health front in terms of a sort of a unified approach, starting at the mayor's conference and with our county. I know our own Candace Anderson, Supervisor Anderson, is a staunch supporter of addressing mental health matters in her district, and has been a champion of that area since she's been elected, and we're really fortunate to have her there in her position. In terms of city oversight, to maybe a question for our city manager, what you've laid out here is something that we did discuss. It was a question that I had in the first meeting around the process for, if there was a complaint made, and if there was an internal affairs investigation held by the sheriff's department, how that would come back around, so that in essence, our CEO of the city, who is our city manager, would be privy to some of that information per law and per labor law, and how there would be more transparency associated with that, with our leader of our city staff knowing that. Just wanted to make sure that how you've written it out here to Narup, is this something, and looking at Ben, is this something that is acceptable per the sheriff's current policy and perhaps union policy? I just want to make sure we've run the traps completely on it, because I think it's really, really important. It's a big change. When you look at everything on here, there's certainly reform throughout each of these, but this is a significant one to me.
I will tell you that the sheriff is aware of this recommendation and is in support of what we are doing here. I think there would have been one other law that probably would have been worth me mentioning in this staff report. I just didn't even think about it at the time. Is Senate Bill 1421, and I think I talked about it on our first meeting on what is releasable underneath Senate Bill 1421. So anyhow, this is a good process. I think, again, in any situation like this, we need to be objective and not subjective, and say, feedback from the community, rethinking how we're doing business, and maybe that it wasn't wrong in the past, but are there ways we can do it better? And that's really been my mindset through this process. Is we've had a lot of great successes at the police department, but based on feedback, based on a tragedy, out of that, can there come additional ideas, additional opportunities? And so that's how I view these recommendations. And I think it, for our city manager and I, communication, there's several other things we've put in place that aren't in the staff report on our level of communication weekly that'll be improvements in this process. So yes, I'm in support of this.
Okay. Great. And to the city managers, just to double click with you on that one as well. You feel comfortable the way it's written and how it would be executed?
I am comfortable with the way it's written. This is a personnel issue that we're talking about, so we have to be really sensitive.
Absolutely.
And protect the rights of all individuals. But I like the recommendation that the chief came up with. And yes, I'm supportive of it.
Okay. One question I do have, we talk a lot about the sheriff and Sheriff Livingston, who, obviously plays a prominent role in law enforcement in our county, a very prominent role, if not the most prominent role. But how about the district attorney? Either to the chief or to the city manager, are we aware of anything that our county DA has done in terms of putting forth any potential law enforcement related reform ideas since this movement has began several months ago?
I do not know what our district attorney Becton has done in this time frame. She's done many things during her tenure since being elected. I know one of the things is there's been a lot of discussion about community court, our youth diversion programs, making them more more consistent amongst different cities. Some cities have them, some cities don't, some look different. And so a lot of it comes to that justice reform, and are we providing equal opportunities to everybody within the justice system? I do know in our county, we have the Racial Justice Task Force, and I'd be happy to provide a link or some information on that. My assistant sheriff, who directly oversees the Field Operations Bureau, which includes the contract city of Lafayette, is one of the, I believe, sub-chairs on that. And that's also being participated on in that with our district attorney Becton. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was her that led the lead on that, but don't quote me on that. So the Racial Justice Task Force, there's been a lot of things that have come out over that. And so I'd be happy to work with Jeff Heyman to put out an informational link for what the Contra Costa Racial Justice Task Force has been doing. And again, the sheriff's office and the district attorney's office have been heavily involved. And again, if I'm not mistaken, I believe our DA led sort of the path in getting that going, if I'm not mistaken.
So one thing I think, I might suggest, we're going to move to public comment in a minute, and that's what this meeting is about. But I do believe the DA plays an incredibly prominent role in law enforcement in our county. Laws are made in Sacramento. They're enforced on the ground level by our police department, and our police department keeps us safe. But they're prosecuted, or they're not prosecuted in the court by our district attorney or by our assistant DAs. So the DA structure, when we talk enforcement rubric, just as an umbrella, the DA plays a very prominent role. And I'd like to see us perhaps come up with a way to engage the DA along with the sheriff, maybe as a committee. And I've just got some thoughts that I'm sort of mulling around that I'll come back with after public comment to talk about some ideas in that realm. I would, before we go to public comment, just like to ask Tracy Robinson and Jennifer Wakeman, our budget manager, to see the one thing we have not covered and what we've talked about, but not specifically covered in these 5 recommendations, really goes to our specific outlay and spend associated with our police department. I wanted to give Tracy and Jennifer an opportunity to mention anything that they would like to at this time.
Wow, that's a big question. The budget is big and it's complicated. Do you have a specific question? I know that
just anything you'd like, Tracy, on the police budget in particular. would be great.
So I know that, for example, one of the public comments by Mr. McLean had to do with comparing, say, our cost per officer. And I do want to caution the council and anybody who's watching, you can't just necessarily show raw numbers, right? Because every city is going to do their budget very differently. So there are things that are included in our police budget that may not be included in other police budgets. As an example, we include the cost of crossing guards in our budget. We have the cost of the emergency preparedness. I think Ben mentioned there's a total of 9 different departments. There's parking enforcement. So I just want to say that those numbers, if you want to know something specifically, we can sort of tease out our numbers. But just looking at the raw numbers is not probably going to be useful. It's not going to be apples and apples.
So if I get that right, Tracy, the numbers we're looking at are not specific to our 17 sworn officers or 16 to 17 sworn. Our emergency preparedness commission budget, our crime prevention commission budget, our crossing guard budget.
Right.
There's much more to it. Is that
there's more to it? There's the cost of the office that we rent for them. So you know, costs for that and animal control. So again, I just want to be careful when we answer questions about what the actual cost is, that we are very specific about the question that we're asking so that Jennifer and I can give you a very specific answer. So I will say, in response to that particular public comment, we did run some different numbers that I think shed different light on that. So I'd be happy to answer specific questions if you have them.
That's great. And I appreciate Mr. McLean for writing in and bringing that to light. Bob, if you're listening or if you're on the call, you always bring great value with your comments and questions. So thank you for that. One thing we're not paying for, though, I just want to make clear and do a double check on this because I haven't asked in a while. We are not paying for any entitlements associated with our officers or the deputies that we contract with to be here in Lafayette. Is that correct? No, there's no annuity payments, disability payments.
Well, those costs for those officers are fully loaded.
Fully loaded.
So the costs of their health insurance and we do have liability and their retirement costs. Yes, that's why that cost is so high per officer. We absolutely do. I think Chief Aldrich can speak to this better than I can. There are a lot of things that we also do get from the sheriff's office that we don't pay for. We get a lot of administrative support. Basically, we only pay for the cost of those officers. I don't believe that they add any additional amounts on for administrative support. We also get access to a lot of the equipment that the sheriff's office has that we don't have to buy. Obviously, dispatch, for example, we don't have to really pay for that. But I think Chief Aldrich could, so I just want to be clear about the things that we do pay for, but there are services that we don't pay for.
And to clarify, we pay for those premiums. We don't pay for, if somebody gets injured, we don't start to manage their disability. They rotate back into the county and we pay for the officer and their premiums.
Great.
Correct.
Okay.
So we don't have to carry officers, for example, who are on disability.
That was a question that I had. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if I could add on, typically if an officer is going to be on injury leave or they're out on workers' comp for more than 30 days, I have the ability to rotate them back to the sheriff's office. And then they are carried on the sheriff's office books, not our books, is one example. Some of the other intangibles, as Rupert's already said, the ability to move an officer from Lafayette if we feel a need for that. If you look at a standalone police department, the process and the monies that go into terminating any employee are much different. You do pay the full load, but you don't pay any premium on top of that. So for example, the sheriff's office isn't charging 5% on top of what I cost the sheriff's office. You're paying 100% of what I cost, but no more than 100%. There are some areas, I do respectfully, just Tracy, we do pay for dispatch services, but you're not paying for the full freight to run a dispatch center. You're paying a set communication charge per the number of staff that we have. And I don't even get charged for our non-sworn staff to be on the police radios. It's just for our sworn staff. So there are some costs. In fact, you don't even pay for me to have access to the police radio. They just charge it to those that are actively working patrol, for example. There are office supplies and equipment that we do get through the sheriff's office on a flat rate per year, $1,500. And that's a list that is laid out in the contract, city manager's guide that they get yearly. That is a bargain for us if we had to buy those supplies per officer individually. So again, you are paying for police services. You're getting some good deals on certain things. Other things you are paying full freight, but on nothing are you paying the added premium of even 1% or 5%. So that's something I always want to mention there.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. And thank you for being here, Jennifer and Tracy. I very much appreciate it. If you could stick around, we're gonna have some questions here perhaps. So I'd appreciate it. So let's go to public comment. This is what tonight is all about. And I've seen one hand is already raised. If you'd like to make a comment, or if you have a question, please hit the little hand print at the bottom of your screen, or hit *9, I believe is how you do it on the phone, right, Jeff?
That's correct. Yep. And we have a couple of people who have their hands up.
Okay. Before we do that, let me just process wise, if I could just indulge the chief again. He did a great job last time. If you have a question, the chief will make note of it, if that's okay, Ben, if you're willing to do that. And then at the end, the chief can just kind of in aggregate go through the questions and answer those questions. And we can always do another round if you need clarification. We've got plenty of time tonight to get into it. So let's go with public comment, Jeff. Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Burks, the first public comment is from Val Sanders, who is joining the meeting now.
And if you could just say your first and last name and at least the city that you live in, an address if you're so inclined, but the city and your name, please.
Hi, I'm Val. I live in Lafayette on Old Mountain View Drive, and I've been here for 7 years. And I really appreciate that you are having these these meetings so that we can be in dialogue with you about this. And I am excited to read the report. One thing I have not heard, and I've been listening carefully, so I don't think it was there, is to talk about the diversity of the force itself. I come from a corporate background, and frankly, if you talked about as a company, responding to issues of diversity and you kept your team being all white men, it's 2020. That don't fly. So every police officer that I have seen in Lafayette, frankly, since I've been here, who's actually on the police force, not traffic enforcement, has been a white male. And I am really curious, what is the breakdown of the police force in Lafayette right now? And what is the plan for that to be more reflective of a more diverse population? I'm going on the assumption that it's pretty white male right now.
Okay, thank you, Val. Any questions for the speaker, Councilmember Bliss? You're on mute.
Sorry, just unmuting. No questions in particular, but just appreciate Val's question and for being here. And I think she raises a really critical issue that I know the chief is interested in speaking to. So thank you, Val, for your attendance and your interest and for what I think is a really pivotal question. So.
Yeah, fantastic question. Thank you, Val. Okay, we'll get back to the answer as we wrap up, but thanks, Val. And just a quick reminder, 3 minutes is the public comment maximum period. Forgot to mention that in the beginning. Okay, we can go to the next one, Jeff.
All right, Councilmember Burks, we have Laura Zucker joining the meeting now.
Oops. Yes, here I am. Hi, everyone. Council members, city manager, Chief Aldrich, thank you so much for taking my inquiry. I'm kind of a one note these days. You know, I was present at the last meeting of the subcommittee and the council meeting after that. And I've read everything, I've heard everything, but it still seems to me that all inquiries into police conduct are handled internally, and there's no opportunity for the public to participate in anything other than a piecemeal ad hoc manner. I love the idea of the quarterly reports, but again, that would require anybody to, it's not an oversight, it's I'm going to jump on this meeting and say, oh, I read this and how about this? So I think in the interest of transparency, I would love to see some oversight body with citizens involved in a meaningful way. City manager, I do not want to impugn anything, your intentions. I know that you work so hard for us, and I'm concerned that this investigation and removal or relocation of an officer would be at your sole discretion. Again, I'm sure that that is impeccable, but again, does not allow for any transparency because it's all a closed loop.
Okay, thank you, Laura. And Laura, you're, just for the record, you're from Lafayette too, right?
Sorry, yes, I am from
Okay.
Lafayette.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Zucker, Councilmember Bliss?
Not a question, but again, Laura, or Ms. Zucker, thank you for being here and for raising this issue this evening, and also at some of our previous convenings. It's not a question for you, but one thing I just want to kind of flag to pick up on what you're saying is when we get to the, back to the discussion and more into the, Q&A after the public comment, I think it would be valuable and maybe, quite relevant to talk a little bit about what's viable in terms of public oversight in two ways. One is, are there things that should be happening that aren't happening under the current sort of committee commission structure? But then also, I think it'll be valuable in the context of this town hall to talk a little bit about any either legal or statutory guidelines that govern how, let me put it this way, that govern any confidentiality provisions as they pertain to personnel issues. I know that police matters are sort of different than your kind of typical sort of personnel matters, but still, I think there's some policy framework that somewhat defines what we'd be able to do as a city. So I think it'd be good to kind of air those a little bit this evening. And I just want to thank Ms. Zucker for her comment and her continued attention to the goal of public oversight on this front.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Zucker. And we'll go to the next speaker.
Okay, we have Janine, who will be joining the meeting now.
Thank you.
Need to unmute. Oops. Hello, can you see me and hear me now? No,
We
not
can
yet.
we can hear you. There we go.
Okay.
We can
There
hear
we
you
go.
and see you. Hi, Janine.
Hello, I'm technologically challenged.
You're doing great. You're doing great.
I'm Janine Crow and I live at 3410 Sweet Drive in Lafayette. And I've been here for, I don't want to really say how many years, I'll give away my age. Been a long time, and my family, the Crow family, has been in Lafayette since before World War II. So we care. We care about our community. I was wondering if, because I was late, I couldn't find the way to get into the Zoom meeting until later. So I was late. I'm sorry about that. But I was wondering, maybe you already mentioned it. Is there some kind of to get us to know, for us to know each other, for us to know our police officers and the police officers to know us, that they're not just nameless people that we only see like in an emergency, but we actually know who our neighborhood police officers are, and they are more, we're just more like familiar with each other. We're not like unknowns. Was that anything about like getting to know each other mentioned?
Okay, thank you, Janine. I think the chief will have a good answer for you at the end when we wrap up public comment.
Oh, and I'm sorry. And then the chief mentioned that there was a tragedy. I think it had to do with the mental health, and I hadn't heard about that. So if you could say what the tragedy was, because I could live in my little bubble, so I never heard about a tragedy.
Okay, to the chief, not to answer that question, but do you have enough to go on to answer it at the end? Okay, great. All right. Thank you, Janine. I didn't mean to cut you off. Do you have any more questions or comments?
Well, I guess I could make a comment. A few years ago, my neighbor across the street was kidnapped by a man who came to the door with a lit blowtorch, and he wanted money, and my neighbor didn't have money. I mean, didn't have the amount he wanted. He might have had some cash, but he didn't have like hundreds of dollars. So he made my neighbor get in the car and drive him to the bank to get money out of the bank to give to him. Well, when my neighbor was in the bank, he told the teller he had been kidnapped and to please call the police. And the police showed up very shortly thereafter and arrested the man. And the man went to trial and found guilty and put in jail. But I mean, that was very dangerous. I mean, my neighbor was afraid for his life and for his house being burned down, which didn't happen, fortunately. But what if it had happened to me? I mean, or anybody really. I mean, it's very scary. So I do want to give a shout out. I don't know who the police officer was or police officers were, but somebody showed up and helped protect our community. So
Okay.
I do want to say thank you. Oh, time is up.
Thank you,
guess.
Janine.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
Any questions for Janine, Councilmember Bliss?
No questions. So just thank you for the comment and the questions, Janine.
Okay.
Welcome.
Thank you, Janine. All right, Jeff, we get to our next speaker, please.
Yes, we have Mary Levy who'll be joining the meeting now.
Thank you.
Hi.
Mary, oh, there you go.
Yeah, my name is Mary Levy, and I live on Willow Drive in Lafayette, and I've lived here for 24 years. My main concern is with the way that the implementation of SB 1421 and AB 953 has been handled by our Sheriff's Department. I know that there are, for SB 1421, I don't know at this point whether all the records that we're entitled to have been released. I don't know whether our city has requested the records on the officers that serve in our city. But I'm concerned about whether the Sheriff's Office is being forthcoming with all relevant records. And I understand that, that by law, we're allowed to take until 2022 to comply with AB 953, which would require not only the release of records, but gathering of information regarding the racial profiling of potentially of people stopped in our town, and wondering why that cannot be implemented to the degree possible as sooner than 2022. If it's something that's important to our community and it's something that can be accomplished, and if funds can be made available to do that, then it seems like something that would really benefit to know, to have transparency regarding the way the police are functioning in our community. So that was my main concern. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Ms. Levy. Councilmember Bliss, do you have any questions or comments for Ms. Levy?
No questions or comments. Just appreciate the question and the interest in making sure that these, relevant state policies are getting implemented appropriately and in good faith. So appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Levy.
Absolutely. Thank you very, very much. All right, Jeff.
Okay, next up is Tracy Riley. Okay, Tracy,
Okay.
you're in the meeting.
Okay, I have been unmuted. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you.
Awesome.
Hi, Tracy.
Hi, everybody. So I just want to take a moment. I've said this at the last meeting, just for those who are new, who have signed on for the first time. I'm one of the commissioners and the chairperson for the Crime Prevention Commission. And I just want to take a moment to sort of, I think everyone maybe take a pause and think about, I think in a lot of times of crisis, we always want to be reactionary and form new committees and to do new things. And certainly there's a lot of things that I think need to be looked at. And I think the chief and the city manager and the mayors in Contra Costa County are all doing that. But I just want you to remember that, there are citizen groups in place already. The city council has, I think, over the years been very wise to have a lot of citizen involvement throughout the city of Lafayette in various capacities, including police. So the Crime Prevention Commission was established many, many years ago. You have direct contact with the police. Anyone in the public has always been invited. In fact, you don't even have to be invited. You can just show up because it's a public meeting. And so I think that there's a lot of touch points that have never really been utilized by a lot of people in the community. And I think that those are ones that need to be, I think, maybe revisited. We can talk about how we can maybe roll us into helping maybe do more outreach. I think the police have done a fabulous job, as many years as I've been involved in the city, with trying to reach out to the public in many, many different ways. And certainly there's room for improvement, but I feel like I just wanted to put out there that I think that the police in the city of Lafayette, I'm only speaking about the city of Lafayette because I don't know how other cities are ran, but I think the city of Lafayette and its police and its chiefs have done a really good job to be as transparent and as forward facing as they can with the public. And I just wanted the public to know that. And I would welcome, as soon as we're able to, anyone to attend the meetings that we have. And there's just all sorts of things that one can learn and get involved and feel like they're a part of it. So I just wanted to say that. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Riley. Any questions for the speaker, Councilmember Bliss?
No questions, but I wanted to say big thanks to Tracy for speaking and great to hear from you as always. And needless to say, thank you for your continued leadership in the city and just for your wisdom on this front. I think you raised some great points and I appreciate you bringing that perspective to the discussion this evening. So really appreciate your leadership.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, and I'll second Councilmember Bliss. Thank you, Tracy, if you're still on the line, for your leadership. As many of you know, and some of you may not know, I think we have the most commissions as a city, only second to Berkeley, I believe, in the Bay Area. And all of our commissioners are members of the public who are volunteers, just like your city council is. And we're elected, but we're volunteers. We're not paid. We're volunteers. So city commission meetings, when they do happen live or on Zoom, are always my audio. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Are absolutely open to the public and are on the city calendar. So it's a good place to go to look for them. Okay, we'll go to our next speaker, Jeff.
Okay, at this point, and sorry, Councilmember Burks, had to put you on voice only because you were starting to lose it there. We're trying to get you back in a sec. Right now, we don't have any other public speakers, so we'll give a shout out to anyone that would like to speak. To please raise your hand now. Use the function down at the bottom. We don't have any call-ins, so these are all folks who are joining us via Zoom. So go ahead and there is one call-in. So if you are a call-in person, you do want to speak, use *9. All right, we have 3 more public comments, and joining the meeting now will be Tess Olson.
Hi, my name is Tess Olson. I'm from Lafayette. I live on Uraga Road. I've been at quite a few of these meetings recently. And so a couple of my comments and questions that I had about the recommendations is that it seems like the majority of them, like the oversight, transparency, and city oversight, are more geared towards like the after effect of what happens when there is like police like misstep or police brutality. And I'm wondering what can we focus more on what we can do as a town to more address like preventing instances of like police brutality, policing, unwanted policing, and what we can do on that front. Because I think it's also really important to note that while more training would obviously be great, because the training is pretty limited what's in place right now. Training without policy and strong oversight won't do anything, according to many research studies done on these sort of things. And I'd also like to echo Ms. Zucker's comments about internal investigations, why there isn't an outside body to look at citizen complaints about that, because it does seem cyclic. And if I had an encounter with the police, I don't think I'd want to have that, like, and it went poorly, I don't think I would want that to be handled by the police, because that seems cyclic and might not help. So also, yeah, again, echoing the idea of citizen oversight, and also just posing a question of like, how much power do we as a town have over the police here, since I know that it's a contract. So I'm just wondering like how much power like the Lafayette City Council has, because I think that's been a little difficult for me to like comprehend, because when the topic of reallocating resources from the Lafayette police was raised, it was brought up that it was a contract, so that would pose an issue. So I would just like to understand more how that works. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Olson. Councilmember Bliss, do you have any questions for Tess? Or comments?
Not a question, just a couple comments. So first of all, really appreciate Ms. Olson's words, and she's been very vigilant about attending these discussions. So it's great to have you involved, and hope that continues. I really encourage you to continue to be part of this discussion here in Lafayette. So really appreciate your perspective and your involvement. So thank you for that. And I think when we get to, the chief will be speaking to a number of these issues as we get further into the meeting. I just want to kind of maybe see if as part of that, we could, he could speak to, or the city manager could speak to a couple of the issues that Ms. Olson raised, particularly in terms of, sort of which of these components, either in the recommendations or in the current operations of the department, really do get to more of the upstream kind of preventative measures. I think that's a really great question that Ms. Olson raises. And then just also specifically the point about the, anything that should be known for this discussion about whether the contractual arrangement, how that, just in a broad structural sense, bears upon our ability to sort of control the budget as a city. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be, later this year in December, kind of coming back to the budget and possibly making some adjustments based on the fiscal realities, but also based on some of these discussions that are going right now around police funding. And so I think it'll be useful, picking up on Ms. Olson's question, to just to kind of come back to that issue she raises about, what within the bounds of our contractual arrangement with the county we are potentially able to do. So I think that'll be important to know as we go into the next several months. So no questions specifically for the speaker, but I did just want to draw a line under some of those questions. And again, thank Ms. Olson for her great comments.
Okay, thank you. And I'll second Councilmember Bliss's thank you to Ms. Olson, who's always here, and thank you. Please continue to be here and at our task force meetings as well. So thank you very much. All right, we can go to the next speaker.
Okay, so joining the meeting now will be Lynn McMichael.
Hi, Ms. McMichael. We can see you and we can hear you.
Okay, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you so much for having this meeting, and especially the decision to do quarterly meetings, because I think that'll help all of us to be up to speed. A couple of questions. In terms of, and I read the reports, both Chief Aldrich's police report at the last meeting, and then this one about the committee that you and Narup Srivastava are heading, and thank you for doing that. My questions are, well, a couple. One, I echo the idea of diversity for the police department. Also, an encouragement to get women police officers in the system as well. But I do have a question about the county and the sheriff. And that is, I wonder, with those courses that are on diversity for the police officers in the county, I wonder how many are Black teachers or instructors in those courses. That would be an interesting thing for me to find out, and maybe Chief Aldrich knows the answer to that. The second thing was, in terms of the police interactions and the report of them, I would like to echo what I think Val Sanders said earlier, that waiting till 2022 for some kind of update on that, I think is not really satisfactory. The other thing I wanted to ask was if you could tell me, and I don't think I read it in the reports that you submitted, the no-knock warrants. I'd like to know what the status of that is with our police department. I'd like to know about the amount of military equipment to police departments in our county, as well as to ours. And what is the status of the qualified immunity that is being addressed, I think, in other parts of the country? And I just wanted to comment one more thing. I know my time's running out, but over the last 30 years, the US has dramatically increased its investment in policing and incarceration, while dramatically cutting investments in social safety net programs. Thank you. Thank you for letting me speak.
Council Member Bliss, you need to unmute.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was going to say, Lynn, you can take some more time if you'd like. If you'd like another 20 or 30 seconds to finish what you were reading, that's fine. If you unmute yourself.
Just the last sentence of this, between 1986 and 2013, for example, spending on prisons and jails nationally grew to 141%, while spending on higher education grew by less than 6%. That was an attention-getting statistic for me. And I think we all of you, all of us, want to go in a different direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. McMichael. Councilmember Bliss, do you have any comments or questions?
No comments or questions, just appreciation to Lynn for her comments, and also she's provided a number of comments and resources via email over the last several weeks, all of which have been great. And one in particular I just want to mention does refer to the CAHOOTS program in Eugene, which, as City Manager mentioned a little while ago, is one that will be, that the public managers will be looking at as a potential model for potentially propagating here in Contra Costa County. So I just want to thank Lynn for being such a great source of information and wisdom on these discussions.
Thank you, Councilmember Bliss, and thank you, Len, for joining us tonight. Okay, we'll go to the next speaker, Jeff, if we might.
Yes, Janet Thomas is our next speaker. She'll be joining the meeting right now.
Thank you, Jeff.
Hi, I'm Janet Thomas. I live on Palomares Avenue in Lafayette. I've lived here for 35 years, and I actually wanted to just express my appreciation for what's being done. I was very pleased with the staff report. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Narup. My main concerns were around training of police, actually. I think we all know, and I have no specific complaints about our police department, but there are many police departments across the country that have a culture that we might want to look at. And I think that regular training, including role playing, which I know in countries like Germany happens on a monthly basis, how to talk to people. You know, and I'm sure that's involved in some of the training. So I will be really interested to hear what training programs the chief comes up with. He's going to be investigating that, and I think this might be a model to the whole sheriff's department. I've had some issues over the years with some of what I've seen with the sheriff's department in terms of transparency and respect for the public, and I think that possibly the chief could, and our city could be a community that could provide a little bit of modeling there. And then I just want to overwhelmingly acknowledge looking at what other communities are doing, such as Eugene and the Cahoots program. I personally feel having a safety net, because as Lynn just mentioned, many of our public services have been diminished over the last number of years, especially for mental illness. So having some kind of an integrated regional approach, and Narup, I'm so glad that you will be looking at that, because again, you know, there are programs out there that that are so successful. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, and by sharing regional resources that other communities could benefit, I'm just so encouraged that we're moving in that direction. So thank you very much for I see this as very proactive, and am very, very pleased with what I see in the staff report. I am also glad that Narup will be involved in some of the oversight of the specific policing. I think the more, and that the chief will be presenting quarterly so that the community can express some of their needs, so that the chief understands what's going on in Lafayette, so that our police becomes a part of our community and is seen as such. So that's also very hopeful to me. So thank you all.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Councilmember Bliss, any comments or questions for Ms. Thomas?
No questions. I just want to thank Ms. Thomas for the comments. Great to see you. Great to hear from you as always. And I really like the idea about, you know, possibly thinking of Lafayette as a place that can innovate, something that we typically do across various areas, and maybe even be a model for other communities or for the county. And then also kind of conversely, you know, the idea of us learning from models elsewhere, I think is a really powerful idea. So I want to thank you for highlighting that as part of the discussion tonight. So great to hear from you as always.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Thank you for joining us. All right. We'll go to the next speaker, Jeff, if we have any.
So at this point, we don't have any hands raised. So if one of the attendees would like to make a public comment, use the raise your hand function, or if you are calling in, you can go ahead and hit *9. But as of now, there are no hands raised, Councilmember Burks.
Okay, let's give it just a minute or so, Jeff, if we could. So we got a lot of folks on the line here, and I learned how to look at the participant names. This is great. A lot of great folks out here that have been in a lot of our meetings, and I just want to take the time to thank for all of the write-ins from these folks and others and emails and so forth. And as Councilmember Bliss said, that we read everything that comes in line by line. It's like you're in front of us speaking to us when you email us. So if you can't make a meeting, please do reach out in advance. So now's your opportunity. If anybody would like to make a public comment or ask a question of the chief, certainly can now, and we'll just maybe give it another 15, 30 seconds before we bring it back. One of the things we'll certainly do is, I'll make sure that we tie in, or I tie in everything that we've heard tonight into our task force meeting, as I said earlier. So we make sure there's a real good link up there. Okay.
No hands are raised, Councilmember.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Okay, so we'll go ahead and bring it back to the subcommittee, and thank you all for the comments and questions. Perhaps I can turn to, unless actually, Councilmember Bliss, do you have any questions or comments before I turn to Chief Aldred to address those that were asked that he was taking note of?
Nope. I know that he's been making note of them as we've been going, as have you, Councilmember Burke. So no questions or comments. I think where I think you're headed, which is to let the chief kind of weigh in, I think is the right way to go. So thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, Chief Aldred, can we turn it over to you to kind of go down the list if you might?
Yeah, tried to make sure I got everything. If I happen to miss something and that one of the council members in the group caught that I missed, please let me know. I do want to start off, there's been a lot of talk about mental health services and social services. And one of the things that I want to say is, in law enforcement, tools for us to use, or to resources, I should say, for us to send people to is always valuable. And a couple of our speakers talked about a lack of spending in some of these areas. And there's a whole historical thing you do go back to the 80s and 90s in the state of California with state mental health mental hospitals. But when law enforcement typically gets called, and the word 5150 is really, they use it in songs and everything else, but the Welfare and Institute code is 5150 when you place someone on a 5150 hold. For the California code, is when they are a danger to themselves or others. And that is a statistic that we do track at the police department. There are other calls that we may get, such as a welfare check, a suspicious circumstance where someone called in because they saw someone who was acting different, or erratic or whatever else. And when we go to those calls, it could be someone who could benefit from mental health treatment, but does not meet the 5150 criteria. And we don't really have another tool. We can't force them to go seek help. For example, if we have a homeless person that needs, that could benefit from services, we have limited tools to force them to go and go to that resource. But I'll give 2019 as an example. In 2019, we had about almost 17,000 calls for service, 16,800 calls for service. Of those, 62 were classified as 5150 calls, where officers showed up and someone was deemed to be a threat to themselves or others, and they were placed on a 5150 hold and transported to the county hospital for evaluation. When we get those calls, that's typically when someone's in crisis. And so we're not getting the calls ahead of time when someone probably could use some help. It's they are at crisis. They're either threatening to hurt themselves, they're threatening family members, have hurt family members. And now we're getting called by members of the public or people within the home on a family member. And every one of these is tragic, and I don't want to diminish that. Of the 62 in 2019, we had to use force 3 times. And for us, when we talk about use of force, that can go everything. We always immediately jump to firearms, right? But use of force for us includes using an electronic weapon. If we have to use, your hands or your fist, to using an impact weapon such as a baton, to using pepper spray or a chemical agent, to me putting someone in a control hold. If someone says, I don't want to go, I'm resisting arrest, they're a threat to others, and we have to put them in a control hold to get them safely to the ambulance, that's classified as a use of force. And so of the 5150s that we've had over the last several years, most of the time when we've had to use what's classified as use of force, it's a physical force, which is typically a control hold that's used to get that person from point A to point B and get them safely there because they don't want to go get treatment, or they, these are people that are in mental crisis. They're not in the right mind, if you will. So I just wanted to clarify that. Again, 16,800 calls for service, 62 of those an entire year were 5150s. And of those, we had to use force 3 times. And just some perspective and some statistical data from our side. Going back to use of force, again, I know it goes back to that training component, and a lot of questions revolving training. Again, in 2019, I've already given you the calls for service, almost 17,000. Our officers had to use force approximately 10 times out of 16,000 plus calls for service. And that use of force ranged from an instance of they had to use a closed fist or a punch, to using an impact weapon once, to our canine apprehension, to, again, the physical force. A great example was a gentleman last year caught making threats against a couple of store employees, was arrested for making what we call terrorist threats, or threats to kill somebody. They went to arrest him. Obviously, he did not want to be arrested, started moving back and forth, did not want to go into handcuffs, and they had to use, again, control holds. And control holds are essentially arm manipulation to get the arm in a position where they can safely place handcuffs on them. So anyhow, I just want to give that as a little bit of context as we go into some of the questions. Diversity of the police department, question 1 from Val. You may not have caught it. I did try to, on page 1 of my staff report going into page 2, I did talk about our diversity of our police department. I'll just cover that real quick. We're currently authorized for 17 sworn officers. And again, that includes the sergeants and myself. We're currently staffed with 15. Of that, let me go back to this. 2 are Hispanic, 3 are Filipino, and 10 are white or Caucasian. We do have civilian staff, 5 of which are full-time, 5 of which are part-time temporary employees. Of them, 3 are Hispanic, 1 is African-American, and 6 are Caucasian. I do, in the following paragraph on page 2, talk about how we make selections, or our pool of candidates. That was a question from our first meeting, is what is your pool of candidates? When we have an opening at Lafayette Police Department, a posting is put out to all Sheriff's Office employees. You do have to be patrol qualified in the Sheriff's Office. When you graduate the academy, typically you're assigned either to our Custody Services Bureau or our court division, where you act as a bailiff. And after a period of time, you're able to put in to go to patrol, and sort of a seniority-based thing. We have some deputies who have spent most of their career, if not all of it, in the Custody Services Bureau. And then we have some who, like myself, only spent 2 years in my Sheriff's Office career in the Custody Services Bureau. But you do have to be patrol qualified, meaning you went through the patrol field training program. So you get hired, you go to the jail, you go through our jail training program. When you want to move to patrol, then you have to go through the patrol training program, and there are requirements mandated on that by the state of California and California Post, Police Officer Standards Training Commission. So there are 600 plus deputies in the Sheriff's Office. The pool of candidates for patrol qualified does become smaller. Of that, they are able to put in a letter of interest to myself. Once the letter is open for a period of time, we close the letter. I conduct interviews with every candidate. In my time here as your chief, the most I had apply at once was 3 officers. Others have been 2. And these are people that voluntarily put in. In the sake of transparency in this conversation, I have not had an African-American officer put in. Since I've been your chief, I have not had a female officer put in. And so I'm a big believer that diversity has extreme benefits in any organization, to include police departments. How a female officer can interact with a victim of a certain type of crime can be much different and much more impactful than potentially the interaction of a male officer. And we know that in law enforcement. My wife was in law enforcement for 10 years, and how she can handle something. We all bring something different to the table. All of us on this call bring something different to the table. So having variety, whether it's gender, sexual orientation, race, brings value to any organization, and that's something I recognize. And so for us, in my time, the only non-white person that put in happened to be a Filipino, and he happened to be the best qualified officer that time and was selected. And so we strongly select people based on merits, while recognizing there's value to diversity, but that is dependent on that employee putting in to want to come to Lafayette. Police Oversight Committee by Ms. Laura Zucker. That term can have a lot of different meanings depending on the community you're in, and how Oakland Police Department has their Police Oversight Commission is one model. It's a model that came about due to a lot of other issues in that organization that they had challenges with. And so I think when we have a discussion about police oversight commissions, we really need to talk about what is the role of that commission and what assignments or duties they would have. And our model of city manager of our public safety committee, I think has worked well. I think our complaints or lack thereof, we do get them occasionally, have been very, very low. Obviously, if we were having a higher level of complaints, especially complaints about racial profiling, discriminatory actions, that might change that need. But where we stand and what we've established through our 2 commissions that meet with the police department, through our city staff, and through the council and the public safety committee, and really addressed it in the staff report. You as a community member, if you're out on the street and you see something that's done by an officer that you think is an issue, whether they're speeding, running a stop sign, talking, to you thought they were racially profiling someone, you have the ability. And if you don't feel comfortable calling the police chief, we have a city manager who drills into me the 24-hour response on emails. But I have a city manager who's available. We have council members who are available. So I've heard before some people say, well, I don't feel comfortable going to the police chief. We do have other avenues for you to do that and address a concern that you have with any city employee or any contract service that the city has. Public Works, the police department has 2 examples of contracts. So I think those things have been working well, and I would encourage us to continue down that avenue with respect to some of the requests that have been asked. I think it's been working well. We had a question, I thought was a really great one from Janine about how do we get to know our officers? We right now, through our Citizens Academy, through our involvement in special events, through our Recess with a Cop, are avenues that we've used right now. But I think it's a great thought, Janine, and I will look at other ways. Maybe we can sort of introduce our police department more to the community. We have looked at having, for example, Coffee with the Cops is a model that's used in some organizations where we let you know we're going to be at a certain location if you just want to come by and say hi. And that's something I'll definitely discuss with the Public Safety Committee, is what more can we do in that arena? It is something we take very seriously. And again, I think our Citizens Academy that we host twice a year, obviously with COVID, that's screwed up this year, has been one of the best models we have for you getting to know your police department. Mary talked about Senate Bill 1421 and I believe it's Assembly Bill, not Senate Bill. So yeah, Assembly Bill 953. 1421, I'm not the best historian on this topic, but I do want to give a few tidbits of thought as a police officer and why there was some pushback, if you want to call that, or we'll call it pushback when Senate Bill 1421 went into effect. When it went into effect, with respect to our legislature process, many times things aren't quite spelled out all the way in many laws, and later on they become more spelled out by, say, a judge. And in this case, judges ruled on the interpretation of 1421, One of the big questions with 1421 in releasing police officer records is it didn't lay out, did it start effective January 1st, 2019, or I believe it was 2019, or for anything that happened from there forward, or was it retroactive back 10 years, 20 years? And so a lot of police unions and police departments, for police departments, it was, they don't want to be civilly liable if they release stuff they weren't supposed to release by employees that are wanting to sue. That's a component of it. But it really came down to judges making rulings that said, here's 1421, here's what it means. You have to go back before 2019. Once that was clarified in court, then the sheriff's office moved forward and under PRAs is releasing that information. So that information is out there. We had an inquiry recently at Lafayette Police Department, and in full transparency, the individual did file an internal affairs complaint this week. And one of their questions was police records, and pursuant to 1421, we had to make any notifications that did apply to the officers that the complaint was filed against. And we did that. 953, I hear what Mary's saying. I note the sheriff's office are currently testing the data collection system or software that was purchased or developed for that. When the requirements to release a report in 2022 requires that we essentially begin collecting data in 2021. So we're getting really close to starting collection of that data. It's you collect the data in a year, and by April of the following year, you're required to release that report through DOJ. So that April or the 2022 is in the law is laid out as April of 2022, and that'll be data collected from 2021. So that process is coming, and it's coming fairly soon. Again, accurately recording every police contact. We have to have a system in place that allows for that accurate capture of that. I started out my career in the California Highway Patrol back in 2002, and during that time there was an agreement between them and I believe it was the ACLU and data collection, where we were literally filling out Iowa basic type forms, filling the bubble and the Scantron. Obviously with technology we've got much more advanced, and so again that is coming. I have limited control of that, but that process is actively in the works and being tested to make sure that it's accurate, and will be coming. Thank you to Tracy for all of her work as chair of our Crime Prevention Commission and former council member. I do value our commissions. Our commissions bring a lot of value to me, having that direct feedback from members of the public. Again, these are folks that put their hand up from the community and said, I want to be a part of the commission. City council appointed them. These are your community members that are coming out and being a part of these commissions free of charge, if you will. And so that's been one of my favorite things working for you guys as police chief is our Emergency Preparedness Commission, the Crime Prevention Commission. It was the Emergency Preparedness Commission that put out the La Miranda Wildfire Residence Guide to Wildfire Preparedness and Evacuation. Team effort between me and that commission. I would not have been able to put that out by myself. Duncan Siebert, our chair, led the charge on that. On our crime prevention front, a lot of different programs we've had over the years. Again, it's our crime prevention commissioners that are leading the charge because I don't have the bandwidth to do all the work they do for me. Internet safety for education for parents about their children online is a great example of something our crime prevention commission has been working on lately. So a lot of value to those. Tests on, there was the comment about how do we prevent this George Floyd or prevent I can't remember exact terms to use, but what is the mechanism for prevention in the future? And I think there's several components to that, and we talked about a little bit on the community or the first meeting is one, having laws, and we've talked about some of the Assembly bills and Senate bills. Talk about our California Police Officer Standards Training Commission that lays out standards in a variety of areas. I mean, you can go through, if you ever want to go look to California Post or ca.post.gov, I believe, great resource to look at mandated training out there for law enforcement agencies. and again, yes, those are minimums, but you have to at least meet the minimums a police agency does. 2, our policies and procedures. And lastly, it's 2, level of supervision. It's your initial training of an officer. It's your ongoing training of an officer. It's also the quality of your supervision and management. I take a lot of pride in that. I have 2 great sergeants over at Lafayette Police Department. They know their troops. They work hard to make sure we're doing the right job all the time. They field complaints. They field questions from our community. When you have a crisis, it's the supervisor that shows up and becomes your incident commander. I'll be frank, I think we need 1 more sergeant, at least at Lafayette, but that becomes a budgetary question in the future. But with the 2 sergeants and your police manager, myself, we work really hard to provide that oversight and that ongoing education. There are times where, for example, earlier this week, a gentleman called in and said, hey, one of your officers looked like he was looking down at his cell phone or computer, sort of stopped at a stop sign. And I tried to go forward and then he moved forward. And then, it seemed like he really wasn't paying attention. I said, thank you for calling me. Brought the officer in. He said, yeah, I was looking at my police computer. I'm sorry. And so training for us isn't you just go to the training that's done. It's daily conversations. It's, hey, you guys went to this critical incident today, hey, we had this call today, and we talk about it. I gave an example, I believe, last time when the group Hip Hop for Change came out and set up in front of Whole Foods. We had some people call in and complain that they were there doing fundraising. We had others that said, why are you even going out to that call? That call has been talked about quite a bit in our police department. After the officers initially went out and realized that no one's breaking any laws, they left, had a great conversation with the people there. A second time they got called, it sounded like some things had changed, maybe where there was a violation of law. The officers went out and determined there wasn't. After the 3rd call, I said, we are not going back out. We've already gone out there to determine someone's not committing a crime. And we, I'm not faulting the callers, but we can't become a tool to potentially make someone of a different race than the predominant race of our community feel uncomfortable being here when they're being here lawfully and promoting a great organization that they believe in. And so those are conversations we have, again, regularly at the police department. And so prevention is daily. It would be my argument to that, and beyond just the training and everything else we talked about. Power of the police department. What power you as a city have over it. I think first and foremost, the contract city model you do have, the first step is when you select a lieutenant from the sheriff's office to be your police chief, you guys put me through a fairly normal police chief process. And so you're not shortcutting it, and the sheriff isn't just saying, here's Bob and he's your new chief. You guys had candidates put in from the sheriff's office. There was 3 of us at the time. You went through 3 different panel interviews, asked a lot of different questions in a lot of different fields, and you guys made that selection. And as I've said before, I serve at the pleasure of the city manager and the city council. The joke for police chiefs, and I think it's probably the same for city managers, is in our town, we have city council meetings on the 2nd and 4th Monday of the month. So any given every other Monday, the city manager and or I are up for being removed by the city council. So right there, one, as your manager, you have the power of who your manager is. And if you lose faith in me or lose faith, well, just lose faith in general for whatever reasons, you have the ability to make a replacement. So first and foremost, I like my job. I want to keep my job. And so you do have a lot of power and direction. There's also another component for me, and I would say this is true of any chief, it's just sheer professionalism. My job is to serve the city council, to serve the city manager, to serve our community. The community elects the city council, who selects the city manager. We all know this, who then selects myself. I want to do a good job for y'all, and I take that very seriously. This is my professional resume. As I've said before, I have a wife and 2 young kids. I take a lot of pride in what I do, and so I want to stay your police chief, and I'll end with that topic. The other power thing, if you will, is you all control the budget. I put forth a recommendation. As I've talked before, or I laid out in the staff report, about 85% of our cost at the police department goes to personnel. And that's not unusual. I talk about in the staff report that we are a service provider. We provide the service of public safety. And so our employees are the frontline providers of that public service. And that's why we invest heavily in training. We invest heavily in making sure they have the right equipment. My job is to make sure my frontline employees are providing the best service possible. I don't leave the office every hour on the hour. I'm in the office quite a bit. But my goal is, and my job is to create an environment of success, of engagement with our community. So we have authorized sworn. There's a certain cost to those authorized sworn. After that, let's say the 15% is where you have power over the entire budget, right? You all know this, but if you want to cut the number of officers down to free up a certain amount of funds, you have the ability to do that. I'll just touch briefly on, for those that were on the first call we had. So currently our staffing model is you have 2 beat officers per shift. Our officers work 12-hour shifts, so we have a day shift and a graveyards. There's 2 beat officers on the shift. That means you have 2 beat officers working for the town of 26,000 people. Any call, every call. So that accounts for 8 police officers. Yeah, I'm doing my math right here. And then we have 2 traffic officers. And again, traffic enforcement, we get a lot of calls and complaints about traffic and speeding or stop signs and school safety. I think it's wise for the city to invest in our traffic enforcement program. The other benefit beyond traffic safety is that the officers are on during sort of our highest level of call service. So we essentially have the ability to add a 3rd beat officer when calls for service escalate, become more numerous. They can stop doing traffic enforcement and go handle a call for service. Then we have 2 detectives. Our 2 detectives, again, I would adamantly argue that we need to continue our detective bureau or fund our detective bureau. The success in reducing crime and or solving crime that my predecessor put in place and that we've worked very diligently continue, I think is important to our community. And I would hate to have that service or that ability to provide that level of service diminished. And then we go to the 2 sergeants, and then you go to myself. We are carrying a vacation relief vacancy, and we're carrying our youth services or community service officer vacancy right now. But I went off a little bit on topic, but I would argue that your city council and city manager have a lot of control over what we do. Part of the contract, as far as what you're obligated to on the contractual side of it, if you say I want 15 officers, then you're going to be obligated to pay for the 15 officers that show up to work and are signed to Lafayette. So beyond that, if you say I want instead of 17 authorized, I want 13 authorized, I just want 8 authorized. Again, you have the ability to change that contract. It's just you have to pay for the service that's being provided at whatever level you feel is appropriate or that you want to do. Hopefully that answers that question. Again, the city has the ability to split off. Again, in full transparency, we've had Oakley and Santa Monica contract cities with the sheriff's office. They no longer are. And it's a decision for a council on budgetary matters. I don't know all their reasons for doing that. A city has the ability to do that. It goes back to Lafayette being a limited services town. We contract for a lot of things. You also contract for police department. The model that we have in Contra Costa County for contract services is one of the best ones I've seen. For example, if you go to Orange County, Dana Point, for example, the community Dana Point contracts with Orange County Sheriff's Office to provide police services. And they're in their county, in that city, they drive sheriff's office vehicles and they wear sheriff's office uniforms and they have a police manager, and on the back of the car, it says serving the community of Dana Point. I think the model of Lafayette, where you essentially own the brand, I think does a lot to that community. This is our police department. That's a personal feeling of mine, but I like that you do that model. I think it really allows the city to say, this is our police department, and you hire police chiefs that want that. And that's my goal for y'all, to be that person. Courses, Lynn had a question on courses taught by African-American and some topics. Lynn, I wouldn't be able to give you a stat on that. I can tell you my implicit bias training, one of the instructors was African-American. I can't tell you, we have a lot of employees that go through trainings. We have multiple trainers, so I wouldn't have that statistical data for you. I can tell you myself and Sergeant Dave Landano went to a great training early this year that was put on by St. Mary's College. And that was taught by an African-American professor from Texas. One of the best trainings I've been to in a long time, and it's actually one of the things I hope to be able to bring about in 3 months for recommendations, is actually bring that doctor back. One of the best trainings I've been to when you talk about engagement with others of different backgrounds and ethnicities. So anyhow, no-knock warrants. I'd be happy, Lynn, for you to send me an email if you have more questions on that. No-knock warrants, I'd be curious just what context you're talking about. As far as a police department serving a warrant, for you not to have to make make certain notifications, a judge would have to sign off on that. And usually to have the no-knock, you've reached a level where you have someone who's armed and dangerous, and there's a threat level that if we make, knock, 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 police department, you have a warrant for your arrest, or we have a search warrant for the property, that we've reached a threshold that says we expect firearms to be fired back at us, or maybe destruction of evidence or things. It's a very high standard to have a judge sign off on a no-knock warrant. I don't think we've had one since I've been here as your chief. You have to meet a very high danger threshold and also potentially an evidentiary destruction threshold. Not very common. I was a homicide sergeant and a general investigation sergeant for the sheriff's office. I don't know if we ever had one of those in my time in my units I supervised. It's just not usual. Military supplies. I can tell you at Lafayette Police Department, I think the only military surplus supplies we have are a few storage container bins that we got. They were cheaper to store stuff in, and Eric found a great deal on them and free. And so we've used them for storage. We don't have any other military equipment at Lafayette PD that's considered military surplus or anything along those lines. I think where you typically see that in law enforcement agencies is when you look at those armored type vehicles. I can tell you though, I will always argue that our sheriff's office has 2 of them. There are times where there's a need. If you've read the news where our officers were at a critical incident over in Knightson about a week ago with an armed subject, he was firing at our officers. Rounds went off of that armored vehicle. Having that ability for officers to stay safe while trying to de-escalate the situation is a very good tool to have at our disposal. And in fact, that case, 3 officers were hit with pellets from a shotgun blast. And had he been using a different weapon, we may not have 2 officers with us today. So not a sob story, just there are times where certain tools, we need to be there to either protect our officers and to protect our community. But you're not gonna see one of those vehicles just patrolling the streets of a city or Lafayette. Qualified immunity, great question. Qualified immunity, one of the easiest ways to describe it, or a layman's, is if I'm operating within the policy and procedures of my department, I have some protections. I have a qualified immunity if my actions can be shown to be within the policy and procedures of my organization. I think that's a very important thing for law enforcement. If you were to take qualified immunity away, I think you would see officers be very hesitant to do any proactive police work, period, because the liability would go through the roof. This has just been talking off the cuff. I'm not the expert on this topic, Um, a police department who's successful is when they're doing proactive police work, whether it's traffic enforcement, whether it's doing suppression on burglaries, residential burglaries, whatever. Proactive police work is what leads to a department many times driving down a crime rate. If we go to a reactive model where essentially your police officers sit at the police station and or don't literally just hang out on the streets and wait for a call for service, the bad guys will figure that out and they'll start coming to town and taking advantage of that. And not a scare tactic. I'm just a strong believer that qualified immunity has its place in law enforcement. If you completely eliminated that, I think you would see our ranks diminish greatly in the coming years, because if you have zero protections for operating within the policies and procedures, which many times are outlined in state law, California post standards, case law, and those policies have been built on those things, and then you say you have no protection, why would you want to put your family at risk? And I'll just leave it at that. A lot of that's personal opinion, take it for what it's worth. Jails and spending, again, I would argue that's a societal question we always need to answer is, where does society reinvest in our money? How does it reflect our values? I've said before, does a drug addict need to go to jail? Is that the best place for them to get clean? I think there's other countries that have better models. And if we came up with a program that was similar to another country and had other options for taking someone there, I think that's great. When I worked in the CHP, I believe it was San Mateo County, they had a service there, or like a county funded thing, where if you were arrested on a DUI and it was your first time and you hadn't caused injury to anybody prior to being arrested for being under the influence of drugs and or alcohol, we could actually take you to the sobering center instead of taking you to jail. Just one example of other ways to deal with certain types of crimes, if you will. Are there better ways to deal with it to have more long-term success rates than just putting someone in jail? Absolutely, and I'll never argue that. I think there's a lot of room for discussion, and a lot of those things become an experiment. But I think there's a lot of value in that. And really, and I'll go back to what Narup is working on with our city managers within the county. Again, when we typically get a mental health call, it is at a moment of crisis. And if through community programs, through county programs, through city programs, have more resources and tools for those that are going down the path of mental health deterioration, and we can get them help sooner before they enter the crisis and the cops are called, every cop's going to tell you that's a great idea. Again, so I think what the city managers are doing is a great idea, is to say, hey, holistically, how can we better address this really before it becomes a crisis, right? And before the cops are called because someone is at danger of hurting themselves or others. I don't know if I have any other questions or I missed anything. I'll just end with this on budgets. Again, I think I've highlighted, the percentage that goes to personnel. In our police services budget or the other funds that I manage, we don't have a line item that says mental health or social services. And so the service we provide in that realm comes from your beat officers that are working the streets. And again, that's why you've seen California law enforcement really invest over the last decade in de-escalation training, crisis intervention training, recognizing that our officers need to have more tools at their disposal when people are in crisis and not complying with orders, and we just don't have to go to use of force right away. Do we have other tools? Really, the best tool I have is my mouth. That's the best tool of any police officer, is de-escalating a situation, speaking respectfully to someone. So I will talk all night, but hopefully I addressed everything to the best of my ability. So thank you.
All right, Chief, thank you very much. I'd like to turn to City Manager Srivatsa. Do you have any comments before we bring it back to the council or our two council members?
No, thank you. I think the chief addressed all the questions that were raised, and I look forward to a discussion between the two council members.
Okay, thank you, Narub. Councilmember Bliss, would you like to start with our comments?
Yeah, just one quick comment and then just a question to pick up on one item. First, I just want to say, thank you to the chief for the, very in-depth and just deeply thoughtful reflection on the questions raised during public comment. As I said earlier, this is really an ongoing dialogue, and the questions and comments from our public, which is really the crux of the town hall tonight, were wide-ranging and hit on a lot of different elements of policing. And I really appreciate not just the depth of your comments, Chief, but also just your candor and your openness to engage on these various issues. So thank you for that. It really was very much in the spirit of what we're trying to do this evening. So I really appreciate that. I had one question to pick up on your description of, well, a comment and a question when you're talking about just the whole public oversight process and how that works. I do want to underscore what's been said earlier tonight, particularly for the community members that are watching, about the importance of the commissions in Lafayette. I've said this before during numerous council meetings, but I feel it's worth mentioning again. Ultimately, the council is sort of the ultimate legislative body for the city, but the council leans just so heavily on the work of a really wide-ranging network of commissions. I think Councilmember Burks mentioned that we have, if I'm not mistaken, more. I think it was either Councilmember Burks or the city manager. I apologize. Said that we have more commissions than any other municipality in the Bay Area other than Berkeley, and I just think that's such a critical part of what we do. And I would just encourage those who are interested to really look at those. Many of those which have been mentioned tonight are engaged with public safety and policing in some way. And there's just a lot of really important policymaking and advisory functions that happen at the commission's level. So I just want to, as I've done many times before, just encourage people to find a way to get engaged. There's so many commissions and a lot of ways to be involved. So I just want to make a pitch for that. Turning to my question, in terms of the public oversight role of these various committees and also the council itself, there was a really, I think, important question raised earlier tonight about the extent to which, if somebody has a concern about the way something was handled by a member of the police force and they want to bring it forward for investigation or some sort of internal affairs action or exploration. I think the extent to which in certain cases a member of the public might understandably feel not comfortable, bringing that directly to the police or having that process work through the police department itself. I think that's a really key point. I don't know if that's necessarily a common sort of occurrence, but it's important enough that you can understand that if somebody feels like they've had an unpleasant encounter with the police or troubling encounter with the police, they might not feel comfortable coming to the chief directly or having the chief oversee looking into that. And so I was really, I thought it was important earlier when Chief Aldrich mentioned that there are ways that they can not necessarily work through the chief, but have other avenues to having a redress of their concern. I guess I just wanted to ask about what those might be. I just want to better understand how if somebody doesn't want to go through the chief directly for an internal affairs process, like what the avenues would be for someone who doesn't want to go that particular pathway. So if the chief could maybe say a little bit more about that. That was a part of your comments that really kind of caught my attention.
Yeah. So again, we're a service provider, and are there days where our level of service someone can find is not at the level they expected? And so whether I'm going to start the low level and build up to the high level. So I'm getting there. So for example, if an officer said he'd call you back to follow up on your case and doesn't, we've had people email myself or one of the sergeants, or they'll email the officer and CC me and saying, hey, Officer X, you said you're gonna get back to me. What's going on? And so we have things of those nature that come in. And my goal with anytime a citizen calls in and says, hey, I didn't provide the level of service I expected. Let's just start with that one. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to deal with it directly. Those are things that typically don't need to rise to the level of what we call an internal affairs investigation. So again, lowest level possible, and lowest level being if they ask to speak with a supervisor or they ask to speak with a chief. My email is found out there in many places. We've had times where someone emails me and CCs the city manager or CCs the mayor. I would argue that they just want to make sure that more than just myself is aware of their concern. That's happened before, and there is no harm, no foul on that person for doing that. Don't view that negatively if they decide to CC a council member or all council members, or we've had it in a variety of ways. When you have an allegation of excessive force or racial profiling, discriminatory, I don't want to say put everything in a basket, but anything that would involve being prejudicial against someone based on race, age, gender, sexual orientation, those things rise to a different level. I think one of the best examples I can give is about a year and a half ago, someone who's transgender thought that they weren't provide the level of service that they expected from the officer on a report of a theft. They had some concerns that it might be related to the fact that they were transgender. They wrote a very, very thoughtful email to me, and my first job was to get a hold of them on the telephone. First off, identified that the officer didn't call back when he said he would. And that's a problem for me. That's a lack of quality of service, especially when you make a commitment to do something like that. Have I been guilty of not calling someone back when I said it? Yeah, me too. So, we're always trying to provide that quality of service. We quickly identified that it had nothing to do with gender identification. It had to do with an officer who did a detailed investigation, but never called the person to tell them what the detailed investigation was. And once I brought them up to speed, they were very satisfied with it. We had a great conversation, and I consider them a friend now, and actually got to meet them at a city council meeting the following year. So those, to me, when you talk about community engagement, those to me are wins that someone felt comfortable reaching out to me, something that was very personal to them. We were able to talk through, sometimes complaints derive out of either someone fell through on a follow-up call, email, or didn't understand police procedure or process and had a different expectation. And once I bring them up to speed on what that process procedure is, they're very happy. And so we resolve a lot of those things at a very low level. And obviously that's always my goal. If we have something that, again, falls into officers are making decisions based on race, gender, everything else I've just described, or excessive use of force, those things are going to go to a different elevation. And if I cannot handle the investigation locally, the person essentially has the ability to then jump. They can either come to me and let me try to resolve it. And if they're not happy with that, go to internal affairs, go to the mayor, go to the city manager. They also have the ability to go directly to internal affairs. The case I mentioned that was just filed, it was a person that didn't want to interact with me directly on it, just wanted to file an internal affairs complaint. That is fine. They're able to do that. And so what I would say, Councilmember Bliss, is that we do have a process, but there are many ways to circumvent it if you feel more comfortable doing it differently that doesn't count against you, if you will. So you have the ability, if you don't feel comfortable reaching out to me, to email the city manager. Guess what? She'll be emailing me pretty quick, or the mayor. And so we do have a process in place, but if a community member feels they need to circumvent it for personal reasons or whatever reason that is, that's where I say we have a lot of other avenues to get the attention of the city, get the attention of the chief. And I think I'll stop with this topic is, since my time here, we have I know it sounds like I'm brown nosing here, but I've worked in a lot of different locations. We have a council and a city manager that if you're a community member of this community and you reach out to them, you're getting an answer back from them. And if it needs to be addressed by a department head, they're expecting an answer from the department head fairly quickly to address that issue that was brought to the city manager versus the department head. I think it's a great system. It doesn't leave people locked in that if you don't fill out this form and check that box, then we're not investigating. So I think the way we have it is healthy and does provide a lot of avenues. So.
City Manager Srivastava, yeah.
If I might add, I want people to think of our police department, of the Lafayette Police Department, as our own police department, not the sheriff's department that happens to be working in Lafayette. So I supervise all the departments in the city of Lafayette: engineering, planning, public works, and police. So if a citizen had a complaint that was not resolved with the maybe with the department head, that person has the ability to reach out to me. I would want to know that if a person felt they were being discriminated against. I would want to know if a person was not treated well in the city of Lafayette by any employee. It doesn't just have to be the police department. So if you are not satisfied with the level of service that we as City of Lafayette employees provide you, then speak to me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Councilmember Bliss, do you have any additional comments?
No further questions. Thank you, the chief and state manager, for speaking to that at length. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I do too. I think, the depth of response specific to that question, very important, I think, for the public to hear. And thank you to the chief for responding to each and every question. At least I went down my notes, and I think I got everything, and I think you got everything. So I appreciate your diligence in that, and I appreciate our we still have 20. Well, we've got 13 attorneys now. We had nearly 30 in the beginning. So I want to second what Stephen mentioned about our commissions and the impact our commissions have on this town. And for those of you that have not applied for or engaged with our commissions, I would really, really urge you to do so. On the public safety side, I spent 4 years on the Crime Prevention Commission, along with Tracy when she was chair, and then I took over as chair when Tracy joined the council. And one of the things that I did as a member of the public and as the chair of the Crime Prevention Commission is I went before the council for almost an hour and pitched the idea of cameras in town. Now, I worked with the police chief on the idea, worked with the commission on the idea, worked with the public on the idea. And out of transparency, went before the council and took public comment. And but as a member of the public, as an appointed commissioner, but as a member of the public. And the council authorized us to utilize cameras. And we went from something like 85 residential burglaries the year I moved here down to single digits within a few years, mostly because of those cameras and because of the solve rates that the police were able to affect because of those cameras. So that is an example of it's an example of oversight, of buy-in by a member of the public and by a commission run by the public and by the oversight of the city council. And so it's just a really, really good example on the public safety committee at the time as well. So I like the idea that we have in terms of multi-tiers of oversight. And I do believe very strongly in the first recommendation. I believe in all of the recommendations very strongly. And I think I'm very, very encouraged to see the depth of recommendations that the staff presented tonight and the chief presented, and the city manager presented tonight, specifically on the matter of oversight. I believe that our subcommittee, Stephen and I think we can do more. and I do believe that we should hold meetings regularly, at least once a quarter, and certainly as needed if something comes up. But once a quarter at least, and I think that will provide a greater level of oversight and a greater level of a vehicle for the public to come and have a forum to speak, either positively, negatively, in between, to make comments. And we will listen, and we will make changes, and we will have a dialogue. And that's what the character of the city has always been. The city is run by the people that live here. I've never lived in a place that has really shown that truly as an example. So I think at this point, I don't have any questions for the city manager or the chief or for Councilmember Bliss, but maybe we can turn to just directly to the recommendations made in the staff report, Councilmember Bliss, if that's okay, and just kind of go through them, and I'll go through them and maybe just talk about, I won't go word by word, but just to give the folks on the line that don't have them in front of them and don't have the luxury, I do, and just to make sure that that we're perhaps okay with them, Councilmember Bliss, in terms of forwarding them at least to the city council and having another discussion at the city council level in terms of formal adoption. So if that's okay. The first one talks about oversight, and again, it's the Public Safety Subcommittee meeting quarterly. So notice public hearings, meetings, I'm sorry, not hearings, meetings, where we'll receive updates from the police chief. We'll hear about crime stats and ongoing projects, and creating additional opportunities for citizens to interact with our police leadership and the city manager and Councilmember Bliss and I currently in our roles as committee members. The second one is on transparency, specifically around the police chief submitting a quarterly summary report on police department activities to the city council and to the public. This will dovetail specifically with the legislation that Ms. Levy talked about, and I completely hear you, Ms. Levy, on expediting execution of the law as soon as it's feasibly possible to do so, and as quickly as possible. But I think that's a good vehicle or mechanism for that to happen. And currently, the police chief does generate an annual report that's very, as Councilmember Bliss said, very, very informational. And if you haven't seen one, I think they're on our website and our archives. But a quarterly report will allow for more transparency and dialogue throughout the year. I believe in that recommendation pretty strongly. Number 3 is on mental health. We've gone over that with the city manager and her engagement with the Public Managers Association. I think on the complete right track there with that, and on just an absolutely crucial area for the city manager to prioritize. Number 4 is on the more tactical level on city oversight, which again is something that I'm in favor of. I believe our city manager should absolutely be in the know and have knowledge of where it's legally permissible internal affairs investigations or complaints. But having the police chief meeting with the city manager when a complaint is filed and at the conclusion of the sheriff's internal affairs investigation, I think that will provide transparency, provide oversight, and will give our CEO of the city, our leader of our city staff, a lot of knowledge that she needs to have to ensure that we have the police department leadership and the police officers that we need to have on the street here in Lafayette, based on our values as a city. And finally, number 5 is on training. I know this is a big one that we talked about in our first meeting, but having the chief come back within a few months or so and with an outline or a roadmap, really showing what he plans to do in terms of executing on additional training. I think that will dovetail specifically in the areas of implicit bias and cultural, racial diversity and so forth, and crisis intervention. De-escalation obviously is incredibly important, but that will dovetail, I think, with our budget review in December. And if we can get in by then, we can make sure that we have resources available to execute on some of his recommendations that we'll discuss and consider. So those are the 5 recommendations that we have before us tonight. And I would look to Councilmember Bliss. Are there any sort of aspects or elements of any of those 5 that you'd like to call out that you're not clear on, or have recommendations or suggestions on tweaking, or any comments on any of those?
Yeah, just a couple quick comments. I'm comfortable with these recommendations as they are. I considered maybe do we should we codify in recommendations to something about wanting to sort of ensure that there's big public awareness or turnout for those quarterly meetings. But I don't think that's necessary. I think, we have a culture in the city where when we do stuff publicly, the staff takes very seriously in all cases, getting the word out through all the various channels. So I don't think we need to cloud up that recommendation with further direction to staff. And I think the other thing I just want to say about these that I really find important is when you look at these, they really draw on the energy and expertise of a range of players. City council, commission, city manager, the chief. And I really like that because it really it's a very dispersed set of recommendations and that it's actionable for a wide range of people, which I think is really critical. The other thing I would just say is important is I really like that the transparency recommendation is going to mean that these quarterly discussions that you're talking about, Cam, will be open, but also data driven. I mean, there's going to be these quarterly reports that we can really dig into. I think data driven policy making that's the best practice. And I think that if we can be really looking at data quarterly and thinking about what it means for our community, that's a great way to go with that transparency recommendation. So I don't feel the need to necessarily tweak any of these. I'd be open to your thoughts, but I'd be comfortable, offering a motion to move these recommendations to council as they currently are before us.
Okay, excellent, great. Thank you for the motion. I would agree with you. I'm comfortable as well as written. I would hearken back to one of Ms. Olson's statements about, proactivity or prevention, right? And not looking in the sort of waiting for something to happen. And I think, and it's just excellent comments, very, very, really just fantastic kind of train of thought there by Ms. Olson. And I think that each of these actually, by promulgating them tonight, and then hopefully the council will officially promulgate them, will absolutely lead to that proactive approach. And I think will lead to the prevention of anything adverse occurring or at least mitigate the risk of adverse action on behalf of our officers' actions when they're out on the streets doing their job. So I would go ahead and second the motion, and I think we're in favor of that. So we'll go ahead and we'll move these 5 recommendations, Narup, if that's okay, to our next city council meeting if we can. Yes, you have a comment on that? You're on.
I was going to suggest that. We've just drafted the agenda for next Monday's meeting.
Okay.
But I think we can squeeze this in. I will shoot an email. The staff report's done. We can just add a paragraph saying that you met today and are supportive of, are recommending these 5 steps to the city council. It just needs to be very brief. I will shoot an email to the mayor tonight and ask if that can be added on.
Okay, thank you for doing that, because I really think it then ties in nicely to our July 30th, I believe, meeting, our task force meeting. So we'll have a discussion on the council side, and then we can roll into the task force meeting. So as a force multiplier there. Okay, thank you, Narup, very much for doing that. To Chief Aldred, thank you so much again for tonight. We've had close to almost 5 hours of discussion combined with these 2 town halls. And it's just a start. It really is just the beginning of a greater depth of dialogue associated with how we police our city. And I do want to thank the chief and your officers for keeping us safe. You've got a challenging job. It's a dangerous job, and we all depend on you 24 hours a day. And I want to say very loudly and clearly that we appreciate it on behalf of the people of Lafayette. We appreciate what you do, and the fact that you put your lives on the line every single day to protect us and to make sure that we're safe. So thank you for that, and thank you for being open and being willing to listen to the public and responding the way that you did with these recommendations, understanding that it is really just the beginning of a deeper level of dialogue. And to Councilmember Bliss, thank you for your perspectives. They're just absolutely terrific. And certainly when we talk about innovative kind of ways to look at things, I think we're really moving in the right direction with this subcommittee. I look forward to many very productive meetings yet to come.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Bliss, any last words before we adjourn?
No, I just want to echo your thanks to the chief and to city manager and also to all those attended. I thought it was a great discussion. And like you say, looking forward to continuing dialogue on this.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Bliss. And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks,
night.
everyone.